All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Todd, and I'm the session chair today. So welcome to my little kingdom for the morning. Our first speaker today is Peter Hall. Peter is a software developer at Expedia Australia. He's been writing software professionally for 15 years, and he describes some of the things he's done in that time. He has written software that allowed people with vision impairments to vote secretly. He's ensured a steady supply of croissants and sent people places with chainsaws. His professional experience is mostly with Java, and he prefers Python for his personal projects. Today, Peter will be talking about think globally, internationalize locally. Please give him a round of applause.
All right, thank you very much, Todd. Hi, I'm Peter. I work for Expedia. Expedia is a big online travel agent. They have points of sale in lots of different countries that are localized for people in those countries to be able to comfortably use them. And I help write Expedia's libraries that help us do that internationalization in a consistent way. So I'm here today to share some of that wisdom with you. So to introduce the idea of localization, I'm going to talk about a hypothetical piece of software that I've invented just for this, and that piece of software is called Give Pete $10. It's a really good piece of software. It is incredibly popular. The idea of giving me $10 is so popular that everybody is running my software. So, and when I say everybody, I mean everybody in Australia. There is 25 million people running my software, having given me $250 million, making me not the richest Australian, but certainly wealthy. I mean, maybe the 1,000th richest Australian. I'm in that ballpark. But there is a problem with this, and that problem is there are 25 million Australians, and you might think 25 million, very big number, but there are 7,550 million people in the entire world. And the reason this is a problem is because if you compare those two numbers, do a little bit of maths, carry the 1, round to the nearest percentage, 0% of people have run my software. There is a lot of room for improvement here. This applies to Australia, right? If you are from China, then, and everybody in China was running your software, that would be like 20% of the world's population, and there would still be 80% of people who have not given me $10 yet. And there is still lots of room for improvement. So localization is important for this reason. So let's start localizing. Now, the first important concept that you need to understand for localizing is the idea of a locale. So a locale is the word for how a computer describes regional communication differences. It's a way of describing these things for a computer. Now, the first part of a locale is a language, right? English is a language. I'm speaking English right now. I guess everybody in this room is familiar with it. So here's some example languages with their IANA two-letter language codes. That's one part of a locale. It's not enough just to know what language you want to present your software in. The next part is a country, because there are differences as English is spoken between countries. Canadian English, New Zealand English, American English, there are differences between them, which for Give Pete $10, not too important, but if I was making a camping website based around selling eskies and thongs, I would have to localize that to New Zealand quite a lot. That's right. So there are a few other things that can go into a locale, scripts, extensions, variants. I'm not going to go into detail on them in this talk. For most users, a country and language is enough, but if you want to localize to Thai using the Gregorian calendar, but written in Western script, then you're going to need to know about all of them. So now that you have an idea of what a locale is, the next question is, what locale should you use in your software? And there is one extremely simple and obvious answer that tells you what locale you should use. You should use the locale that your user wants you to use, the locale that they are expecting. And so what do your users want? There's a few ways to find out. Your first step should be ask them. Your users know what they want, they can tell you. This will be very accurate if your users are technical enough to understand what a locale is and how to communicate that to you. It's going to be terrible for usability because there's going to be people who will come in and say, I want to give Pete $10, and then they get to my software and it says, so what's your locale? And it's like, oh, this is too complicated, I'll keep my $10. It's impossible to design because if you need a way to ask people what their locale is that can be read before you know what their locale is, that's a hard ask. If there's any design wizards in the room and you come up with something, let me know because $10. So if asking your users doesn't work because of those cons, you have the option of the system default locale in Python, locale.getDefaultLocale, which is really good if your software is running locally on their computer. And it is completely useless if your software is not running on their computer, for example, if it's running on a web server. Knowing the default locale on your web server does not tell you what locale your user is hoping for. But there is a way for them to send you that data. There is a HTTP header, accept language, which is great if you're running a web server. Sometimes the user's software won't send it, or some intervening proxy has stripped it out for some reason, so it might not be there. Sometimes you can't trust this value. I know the first time I ever traveled internationally, I sat down in a web cafe in France and thought, oh, finally a chance to check my email after a week. And then Gmail was in French because that's what the locale was set to on the computer that I happened to be using. And I don't speak French, so it wasn't very useful. I managed to set it back to English and check my email eventually, which is fortunate. So you can't always rely on the accept language header, but it's certainly helpful. So now that you know you can't rely on this, you're going to have to choose some sort of default. And the choice of default locale is not a technical decision. It's a business decision. Do you want to choose the locale that will be correct for the most people? That would be Mandarin Chinese. Do you want to choose the locale that represents most of the world's money? That would be American English. Do you want to choose the locale that most of your existing users are expecting? That depends on your software. It's a business decision, not a technical one, but you do need to have something to fall back on if you have no other way of knowing what a locale is. Or what locale to use. So once you have picked a locale, it's time to start using it. So there's a lot of different things that you can localize. I'm going to start by talking about how to localize the text in your software. It's one of the first things you are likely to think about. So we'll be doing this using Gettext, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So here's a little bit of sample code from my, my Give Pete $10 program that prints out, thank you for giving an amount of money to a name. And that amount is going to be 10, and that name is going to be Pete. Now, when you're localizing your text, the thing that a computer is able to localize is a string. And one of the strings displayed here is space to space. And that's not going to be very useful to hand it to a translator and say, can you please translate the word to for me? Because like, we know here that it is giving money to a person, but it's free of context when you look at just that string by itself. And the context is important to a translator because there's going to be more than one way to translate the word to, depending on which language you've gone to. So our first step is to move it so that a string contains at least an entire sentence. You might want longer strings, you might want entire paragraphs or entire pages, but a sentence is sort of the bare minimum of what you would want to hand to a translator to translate. So I'm going to use a format string. So thank you for giving an amount to a name. The functionality hasn't changed, just exactly how I'm expressing it does. But there's another problem, and the problem is that in English, I've written this here as thank you for giving amount to name. I could have written it as thank you for giving name amount. In English, that could have been either way around. In some languages, you wouldn't have a choice. You would be forced to reverse it from where it was in English because they would always put the object first or always put the verb first. So named parameters in your format strings, it's important, which has two advantages. One, it means you can swap around the order of them depending on your language. And two, that name now gives context to the person translating to say, oh, this is giving an amount to a name. This is not making a donation to a place or an organization, it's a person. And in some languages, that distinction is important. So now that we've made all of these changes, we're ready to introduce Gettext. So Gettext is a piece of software that has been around since the 90s. It's been around for a while. It comes from the GNU project. It was originally used for providing all of the localization of text in the various GNU project libraries. So to use it in Python, there is a Python implementation of it. The original implementation is, I think it's in C, maybe C++. I would have to check. But in Python, you can import gettext, bind text domain, which basically says the translations for give $10 are in the locale directory. We set the text domain, which says, in this software, we are using the give $10 translations. And then we set underscore to be gettext.gettext, which is not a necessary step, but it is by convention it's done, because most software that has strings to translate has a lot of strings to translate. And if you need to write out an entire function call all over the place, it gets verbose. So you bring it down to a single character, which by convention is underscore. So once we've done this setup work, we wrap the string that we're going to translate in the underscore function, and now it's ready to run. You don't wrap every string in your software with underscore, only things that you want translated. So if you're displaying it to a user, you want it translated. If it's a file name or database connection string, anything like that. So don't just go blindly wrapping strings with this function, because you don't want your translators to translate your database connection strings into French. But once you've made this change, you have got to the point where if you run this software now, it does exactly what it did before and nothing at all has changed. And the reason for that is that what we have done so far is internationalization. Internationalization means the changes that you make to your software to make localization easier. And then localization is the things you do to make it so that you can actually display things to other locales. So we've done the internationalization now, and now we're ready to do the localization. Commonly abbreviated to I18N, that's an I, 18 various letters and then an N, because internationalization is long to type, and sometimes L10N as well, because nobody even wants to type the 10 letters in the middle of localization. So the steps for using Gettext for localization, we're going to generate a pot file that's a portable object template file. We will copy that pot file into the right places for where our locale is going to expect them. We will put some translations in them, and then we'll generate mo files. That's the machine object files. That's the machine-readable version of the PO file. Generating a pot file, I'm using pygettext.py. This is a Python implementation of Gettext. That's like specifically for scanning your Python code for strings that have been wrapped in that underscore function and generating the template file that you need from them. So it's part of core Python. It's distributed with core Python. It's probably not put on your path, though. You might have to go looking for it to be able to execute it. And there are other implementations, such as the gettext one that comes with the original gettext, that will probably do the job as well. There's plenty of options for exactly how you generate your pot file. But anyhow, we tell it where its output file is. We tell it which file we want to scan. And it will generate the pot file for us. The pot file has some convenient comments to tell us where in the source code it grabbed those strings from. And then the message ID and message string are basically a key value pair, the key being the string that is being translated and the value being the empty string at this point because we haven't translated it yet. So we copy that pot file to make a PO file. So the directory that this goes in here is important. So the first component of that path is locale. That's not the important part. That's just a convenient place to put these things. It's what I specified in bind text domain earlier. The second component is the name of the locale that we are translating to, which in this case is Australian English. It's one of the few languages I speak as a native speaker. And the third part is lc_messages, which is the folder that Gettext looks in for your text translations. And that component is there so that you can also use this structure for storing other localized resources like images, email templates, anything else that you felt needed to be localized. So copy that pot file over to a PO file. We translate it into Australian English. So thank you for giving amount to name has become, cheers, mate, you gave name amount. So there's our Australian English translation. And then we run messageformat.py to generate the machine object file, the mo file machine object. Again, messageformat.py is a Python implementation of the message format utility that comes with Gettext, distributed with core Python, probably somewhere under wherever your distribution's installed, not necessarily on your path. You might have to go looking for it. Other message format tools will also work. There's a few implementations out there. Now that we have the mo files, the magic happens. And if I change my locale, I can have my software provide my text in different languages. How you change your locale is system dependent. I was running this on OS X. OS X and Linux both generally let you set the lang environment variable to change locales. If you're trying to do this on Windows, I'm not a fan of Windows, don't do it, work it out for yourself. All right. But there we have it. We have some localized text up on the screen. This is, hooray, we did something. All right, there is one other major use case of text that will catch you out somewhere, and that is plurals. So you've probably seen code like this before. We're saying if there is one, we print time. If there is any other number, we print times. And that works great in English. But different languages have different rules for exactly how they apply plurals. So when you get to translating into Mandarin, your Mandarin translator is going to say, oh, we don't do plurals, right? It's the same text no matter how many. And you say, oh, that's great, just put the same text in for both of those translations. And then you will get a French translator who says, oh, yes, but we use the singular for 0. It should be if count equals 0 or 1, otherwise times. And you say, OK, we can do that. I'll put in a, if the locale is French, these rules. If the locale is English, these rules. And then you're going to meet a Russian translator. And the Russian plural rules are very complicated. It's basically if the number ends in 1 or 2, but does not end in 11 or 22, it gets one case. If it ends in 3, it gets a different case, but not 13. 13 is different. And there's about 6 different cases of exactly how a plural form might be formed in Russian. It's so complicated that most Russian native speakers do not know how to say 5 fire pokers, right? It just can't be done. So Gettext has a function that does this for you. It's called ngettext, and it's basically you give the English singular and plural versions and the count to this function. And in the PO files, there is a special comment that describes how to apply the plural rules to get the right one. And this supports having more than 2 cases, which is important for Russian or Welsh or basically every language except for the Germanic languages. So that's it for localizing text. But we are not done. There are lots of things to localize. Dates, times, and numbers using Babel. So let's have a look. So first up, here's a date. 1st of December, 12th of January, could be either. Here's a number, 1, 1,000, don't know. Here's some money, Australian dollars, New Zealand dollars. I'll take either, it's all right. You need a way to print your dates, times, and numbers in the way that is expected for your locale. It would be great if there was a database of all of that information for you. And fortunately, there is. The Unicode Consortium, the same people who gave us the vomiting face emoji, have the CLDR project. That's the Common Locale Data Repository, which is basically a standard repository of all of this data that you're going to need. There is a downside, and here's that vomiting face emoji. It's in XML, and it is in really complicated XML. It is Just like dealing with this XML is going to be really hard, and it is necessarily complex, right? The world of all of the world's cultures and languages and how they write things down is hard to describe, and so it's hard to capture that in a sensible way. Like, it's XML, it's complicated XML, it has to be complicated. Fortunately, there is a Python interface to it that wraps it all up in lovely functions for you. It's called Babel. Here's some examples for formatting currencies and dates, where I can say, format a currency, it's in Australian dollars, and they will write it differently depending on what the locale is, so that it's just a $sign in Australia, but it's an $sign in the US. Or I could format a date, and now it's unambiguous. They know that I mean December, and so they'll write it 1st of December here, and they'll write it December 1 over in the United States. They've removed that ambiguity, and your dates, times, and numbers are now excellent. Here's another big gotcha, right to left languages. Now, if you're writing a console program, this is probably just going to be handled for you by the terminal in which your program is running, if you're writing something for the command line. But if you're writing something with a graphical user interface, there's a lot of things to deal with. So all of these illustrations are now screenshots I got on my phone by just setting my phone to Arabic and seeing which programs did a good job. So the first thing for localizing for right to left languages is people are going to read from the right. That means if you have put something on the left because you want people to look at it first, you need to move it to the right now so that people who are reading from the right will look at that first. So you can see here that the name of the language that I am currently set to has been moved from the left, where it is in English, to the right, where it is in Arabic. But you can't just flip everything to the right, because you still want to interact from the right. People in Arabic-speaking countries, and I say Arabic is not the only right-to-left language. This also applies to Aramaic and Hebrew and a handful of others, but all of the right-to-left languages. I've used Arabic in my example here, though, because that's the most widely spoken of the right-to-left languages. They're still majority right-handed. So if you've got a phone interface and you put something on the right, because a right-handed person will have their thumb there and be able to use it, you still want it to be on the right. So both of these screenshots have the scroll bar put on the right, where you can use it with your thumb if you're right-handed holding your phone in your right hand. So move things to the right, don't move all the things to the right. The next is you need to flip your images around. Here I'm trying to show you the back buttons. Back in an English-speaking country is generally considered to mean to the left. But in a country that reads right to left, it means to the right. So the image of the arrow in the top corner of these screens has been flipped to point to the other side. But don't flip all of your images, because there are some images that you can't flip because they point a way by convention, and that convention is consistent. In particular, the number pad on phones is a convention that was set in hardware in the 90s. They didn't make localized handsets for right-to-left speaking countries, so everybody is used to their numbers being 1 on the left and 3 on the right. And you need to respect that. The same applies to media player controls. You still expect skip and back on a media player to be the same directions as they would in English, because that is a convention that was set when all of this was done on stereo systems in hardware, and they didn't make localized hardware just for right-to-left speaking countries. That's the end of my tips for right-to-left languages. You might have thought to yourself, I know, I will make my website entirely out of pictures so that there is no text, no dates, no times, no currencies, nothing that needs to be flipped around for right to left. And the problem is you still need to localize things because there are cultural considerations in some images. And you're not going to know that without running them by a translator who can look at them. So here's an example. It's a piggy bank. In an English-speaking country, you might use an icon like this to represent money or savings. That will not make sense at all to someone from Afghanistan, because Afghanistan has exactly one pig. It is in the Kabul Zoo. They are not farmed there. They are not native to the area, so they only have one in the zoo. Most people haven't seen it, and they don't use piggy banks to talk about money. You need to use a different image over there. And it's not just confusion that you're avoiding. Here's another example. This is a stop sign. Looks entirely reasonably as something that is saying stop. But if you show this to a Greek person, they might get offended, because in Greek, putting the palm of your hand towards someone with the finger spread is known as the mutsa, and this is broadly equivalent to the finger in an English-speaking country, and this is quite offensive. So don't do that. You still need to run your images past your translators. So I haven't covered every localization issue here, but we've covered a lot of them. Things like names and addresses are still going to need some thought that I don't have time to talk about now. But once you've done all your localization, the thing that happens next is a lot of people are happy with you because they can now use your software. There are approximately 7,000 languages in the world, roughly 200 countries. You don't have to localize for all of them. There's maybe 500 of the combinations of languages and countries that are used enough that you would even consider doing them. Significantly less than that as a first attempt. Like you can get to a lot of the world's people with only maybe 10. But in my case, I can, when you've done all that, you can get to the whole 7,550 million people in the world, which means they can give me $75.5 billion, which is a lot of money. It would make me the fourth richest person in the world, having less money than Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Warren Buffett, but more money than the man who owns Louis Vuitton, who would come next. Thank you very much for listening to my talk. I have a couple of minutes for questions. Thank you very much, Todd.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that talk. We do have 5 minutes for questions. So we love questions. So that we can have more questions, please take a moment to make sure your question is short and to the point. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for that. That was great. I have a question. Once you've gone through this whole process, your app's been wildly successful, you've translated your app into 50 different languages. How do you then manage changes? So this is something that's I've come across. You have 50 different languages. Maybe it's an open source project. You crowdsource 50 different translations. You now can't deploy any changes because then you'll need 50 more translations.
The general way you handle it is it really slows down your deployment because you have to run everything past translators again. You don't have to relocalize every single thing in your software from scratch. Generally, when you make a change, you have not changed the entire face of your software. You have updated a few strings, added one new feature, changed the layout on this page. You only need to rerun those pages, those things that you've changed past your translator. So it's less effort than when you began. It's also less effort because you've already done all of the internationalization part of it, and it's only the localization that needs to be updated.
In C, Gettext, the underscore is implemented as a macro.
Sorry, could you hold the microphone closer? I can't quite hear you.
Is that better? Hello?
Yeah, cool. That's better.
In C, the Gettext underscore is implemented as a macro, so it's fairly, it's fairly easy to pull out all the strings you want to translate, but in Python, that's a runtime operation, right? So are there any issues finding all the strings to translate, and how does that even work?
Yep, so basically it's done by scanning your source code and looking for things wrapped in underscores that are strings. Gettext.py handles it and is a Python-specific implementation that is aware of all of the Python formatting rules and conventions, and so it's fairly good at scanning Python code. You can run into problems. Generally, they're fixable. And if you run into problems with the Python implementation, there's several other implementations. In particular, there is a Perl implementation called xgettext that supports a wide range of languages, including Python. And so if you're working not in Python or you're having trouble with the Python implementation, using one of the other implementations can usually get you past it, or possibly a little bit of manual tweaking.
Okay, other questions? I'll take the one at the front.
Hi. My question is about how do we handle the context of, in different languages? Like there is a word in English, May, it's month, but we use it as a helping verb as well. Like, we may like to help those people, so that's not a month in a sentence, right?
I can't remember the format for it, but there is a way to annotate your code with comments to give that context. So you can add the context that says, we are using May as the month in this string, and then that will be fed through into your profile so that your translators see it, and they've got the comment that says, they mean May the month, as well as the string that's being translated.
We have time for one more question. Was there one here?
Yeah, nice talk. If I've got people writing copy and they're coming up with silly date formats or non-standard ones, how do I deal with translators? Do I need to give them the syntax of my date formatting library and let them move the year around and the date and so on to match locale conventions?
So if your date is coming from a variable, then it's not going to be part of the string, and it'll be handled by Babel and not by the translators. Whereas if your date is part of a string because it's a set date that is being used as an example, or it's a date that doesn't change, then yes, it will be part of the string that your translators see, and it will be up to them to write it how they want. If your date is part of an API, make sure that it's separate to the date that is being given to shown to users, and it should probably be in ISO format to remove ambiguity. You don't want dates that get passed to APIs to be localized. This is a problem we have dealt with at Expedia.
Okay, thanks a lot, and I'm sure Peter will be happy to answer any other questions in the hallway. Join me again in thank